Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by A.G. Hines Company. When it comes to building supplies, nobody beats these guys. They are always a step ahead, as is the case with their line of Nudura insulated concrete forms. These are extremely energy efficient, reliable performance, continuous insulation, all while giving your architect who's working on your project greater design flexibility. To learn more about Nudura, call A.G. Hines Company, visit their website, drop by and see them. They're easy to find. They're on Hines Street in downtown Knoxville. Been around 100 years, you get your own street. Hines Street for A.G. Hines Company. Ask them about Nudura. Be great for the project you're working on. All right, I want to welcome in the final member of today's panel. We have Bob Hodge, longtime sports writer in this town. Bob, thanks for joining us.
Good morning.
Let's talk about Henry To'o. Made his transfer official this week going to Alabama. He was Jeremy Pruitt's prize recruit, had a good freshman year, and then lost a lot of weight. Didn't have, in my opinion, a great year last year. More guys were bouncing off of him, I think, because to me he looked more like a safety than he did a linebacker. We'll see what Alabama does with his weight. He had been attacked for 2 straight years, his only 2 years, in coverage quite regularly. And last year he did not hold up in coverage very well. That said, Nick Saban, who knows a little bit more about football than I do, looked at him and said, "I want you on my team." So, what do we expect from Henry To'o now that he's going to be surrounded by better players? He's going to be getting better coaching. Do we expect him to become the first-round draft pick so many Vol fans thought he was? Or do you say he's going to disappear into the Alabama vortex?
I'm going to go with, I expect to find out exactly how good Henry To'o is. Because I had my doubts.
My question.
What? Excuse me?
You've cavalierised me. You didn't answer, but that's all right. Go ahead.
I just thought when he was here at Tennessee, he always struck me as a little overrated. Made a lot of tackles, yes he did, but I mean, you know, a lot of times the tackles were several yards downfield. I thought last year, maybe it was the product, some of the defensive line that couldn't keep the offensive lineman off of him was the reason he had less of a season. But as people were talking about him as the great next Tennessee linebacker, I didn't see him as one of the great Tennessee linebackers. Go back in recent history, the Al Wilsons, Gerard Mayos, etc. So I think now we're going to find out, did I underrate him if he goes to Alabama and he's a star? Yeah, I did. But I think it's 50-50 which way he goes. I think he's right on the cusp of maybe he does disappear into the Alabama mist.
If he goes down there and stars, I think it's also going to say something about our evaluation skills. I thought he was good as a freshman. I thought the idea that he's the greatest linebacker in the country was a bit inflated. But, and you talked to former Vol defenders over there, and they weren't as wowed with him as his reputation was even after year one. But what it's going to tell us is that Jeremy Pruitt wasn't much of a coach, in my opinion, unless you look at it and say, well, he just didn't have the talent around him that Alabama's going to have that frees him up to be a better player. What do you guys expect from Henry To'o down there?
I think for sure a starter. I'll go by what Alabama and Ohio State both think of him, which is they were both recruiting him really hard to try to get him in there and start right away. Ohio State lost all 3 starting linebackers from last year, wanted him badly, thought they were going to get him. I think even though his dad had talked publicly about Alabama not wanting to make the same mistake twice, he said earlier this year, in passing up Alabama like he did coming out of high school, I think they liked the idea of going there always, but Ohio State thought they were going to get him. So that's 2 of the top programs in the country that want him badly. I think he's going to start for Alabama or they wouldn't have taken him, and I think he's probably a mid-round draft pick next year. I'll be surprised if he's not. If his name's not called on draft day next year, I'll be shocked. So I think he'll be pretty good, but maybe not quite first-round good.
Yeah, I'm with Ryan. I think ultimately read and react skills, like his football IQ, being able to see what's coming and get in the right hole, that's something that's really, really valuable. He's a sure tackler. And I think ultimately, yeah, he's got to improve in coverage, but there's such a thing as a 2-down linebacker. There's nothing wrong with being that. And I think he could be that at the next level. And first-round pick, maybe not. Maybe after 2 years, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. But an NFL guy, a guy that can start and be a major contributor for Alabama, I'll be surprised if he's not one of their top 3 tacklers.
There's nothing wrong with a 2-down linebacker at the NFL level, but usually those are the guys who are putting on weight, not the guys who are down to 225.
Maybe you're in denial about whether or not you're a 2-down linebacker a little bit.
Maybe so, yeah. If you go down that far to 225, you would do that in the hopes that I'm going to make myself a 3-down linebacker, I would think.
Well, and I think that's a good point. If he goes down there and he becomes a 3-down linebacker, then how much of that does go back to the coaching that he had here? Because I do think he was hindered somewhat by a bad defensive line or a defensive line that wasn't as good. but his coverage had nothing to do with the defensive line.
Right.
So if he goes down there and he does show that he's a 3-down linebacker and he does get a good draft slot in the NFL, then I think then you come back and you go, wow, we were always sitting here talking about these coaches, they're defensive-minded guys, but they didn't prepare, maybe one of their better players very well.
Well, I think the people that are around him, I mean, you took a step back in terms of who was beside him in the linebacking core last year. I thought his game went downhill as well. So I think you put him out there at Alabama, and he's got a couple of studs out there with him. I think that the rising tide, rising Crimson Tide, rises all boats, whatever. But I think that could be a part of it as well, because he was better as a freshman when he had Daniel Batuli beside him. Batuli goes, the whole thing drops a little. Is that because he was forced to do more and asked to do a little bit more than he was ready to do?
And I think it's hard because we're not at practice. It's tough to know what is the hard value of a position coach. But I do know that Brian Niedermeyer had never coached linebackers before. And I think that, cause, effect, causation, all those things are complicated. But we saw him with a more experienced linebackers coach, and he was really, really good as a freshman.
Right.
He gets a first-time linebackers coach in Niedermeyer in year 2. No Batuli. It's not just one thing.
Yeah.
But I think that when you have a first-year position coach, I tend to believe that had an effect.
That's a great point. I actually had that down here from a different perspective, and that is the fact that his pro career, because that's what they were trusting this guy with. The family entrusted the coaching staff with their son's pro career. And they said, yeah, we're going to give him a first-year coach. First time a guy who's never coached that position before. The first year with linebackers, I should say it. But that, to me, also speaks to Pruitt's inability to put a staff together and grow it. And, what more do you need to say than he fired a defensive line coach after 4 games? But the fact that Niedermeyer is put with your A1 recruit, he was the prize recruit for Jeremy Pruitt's years here, and you give him a guy who'd never coached linebacker before. I think that's a good point. On your view, I think it's a good point the way I lay it out too. Yes, it probably did impact his play, and yes, it does show that Pruitt couldn't put a staff together.
It all gets so muddled because, he's your ace recruiter. We see now in retrospect why some of those ace recruiter things are happening. He has a fantastic relationship with the To'os and Crouch and all those guys. You want to keep this guy. He doesn't want to just coach tight ends forever. That's not a high-impact position. You got to move him up. But then there's that inexperience, and it's like you can't not move him up, but then you have that effect. It does ultimately go to the head coach.
We are so far over, it's ridiculous, but I'm going to throw one more thing at you. If it turns out that all the rumors about Niedermeyer are true, it will be interesting to see what this means for Henry To'oTo'o's eligibility moving forward. If his name pops up. Again, if somebody's handing out cash in McDonald's bags, which I don't buy that story, but if players are getting paid, wouldn't you figure it would be your big-time recruit who chose Tennessee over Alabama in the first place?
I've been told the NCAA tends to grant players immunity in these cases to get to the truth, so I think that might be part of it. Most interesting thing about this to me, too, Alabama must feel good about that SEC rule passing because to take him now, there's a little bit of risk.
I wonder if the NCAA grants immunity when it's the school that's doing the investigation and handing it over. Another layer to that mess. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk about the SEC and their internal transfers. Remarkably, there's still a lot of schools in the league that don't want to do it. We'll discuss that. Come on back.